Hello, everybody. Hi, Diana. Time to wave at the people you know.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so delighted to see you all here. I would much prefer to see you all actually in Esherick's studio. But as you know, the studio and its small domestic spaces present some particular challenges in allowing people back in during COVID-19. So we're taking our time and being very thoughtful and methodical about what reopening will look like. We do anticipate sending information around about our plans for that shortly, and I hope to be seeing people back in the studio a little bit later on this summer. But in the meantime, I have actually really enjoyed these virtual gatherings because it's people are able to participate from far and wide who might not be able to travel to Malvern to see the studio in person. So I encourage you, I'm gonna hand it over pretty quickly to Nonie Gadsden from MFA Boston and our curator, Emily Zilber, so they can get to the meat of the program. But in the meantime, I will encourage you to check out the museum's website, get on our social media, get on our email list. We're doing a lot of these types of events, and we've really had fun with them. And you'll also be able to keep up on our reopening plans. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. Most of you have probably been Zooming like mad as we have, but you are all muted. We are gonna hold questions for Nonie until the end, but you may use the chat feature. And if you just hover your mouse over, you'll see along the bottom navigation a little chat icon. You can chat to somebody you know that you see. You can chat to everyone. So you can pose questions as we have the conversation. I have not only our curator, Emily, but also from my team, Katie Wynn and Maria Franey. So we're all here to try and tackle your questions as they come in, and we welcome those. And if you're not very familiar with Zoom, you can also manage how you're viewing the conversation in the upper right, where if you hover over, you'll see gallery view, and you can change that to your liking. But generally speaking, the person who is currently talking, their image will be larger, and we'll proceed with questions at the end. So I would like to go ahead and introduce Emily. She'll introduce Nonie. Emily Zilber has been with the Esherick Museum since November. Her and Nonie first met in MFA Boston, where Emily had worked for some years, and she's also been at Cranbrook, and she teaches at Tyler and has done many other independent curatorial practices, publishing and teaching, and she continues to do that, and then works for us full-time also as our curator. So we were thrilled to have her join the team with her extensive knowledge in this field and on Esherick. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily to introduce herself and Nonie. And thank you all for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. As Julie said, I'm Emily Zilber, and we're so excited that you're making the time to spend with us tonight, because I know time is in short supply right now. Hopefully you will be glad you did, or I can say you will be glad you did. This is the first event in our Collections with Curators conversation series, and so we're really pleased to think about and use the fact that we're closed to think about Esherick in a broader scope than we might. And I'm just going to show a couple of images. If you'll bear with me while we introduce Nonie. So at the Esherick Museum, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be in the studio where we see Esherick every day. We're engaged with the collection there of nearly 3,000 objects, almost all of them made by Esherick, and the spaces are indeed full. However, Esherick is out in the world in numerous museum collections. If you head to our website, on our online resources for educators page, you can see linked all of the Esherick works that are in museums across the country. So it's wonderful to be able to see Esherick in the context of the studio. It's even better to also think about Esherick and his broader context out there in the world. So to inaugurate this series where we're talking about these kinds of connections, we want to talk with curators who care for Esherick works like Nonie Gadsden. Nonie is the Katharine Lane Weems Senior Curator of American Decorative Arts and Sculpture at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where she's responsible for a wide range of artwork, including decorative arts and sculpture from North, Central, and South America, from ancient times to the 20th century. So certainly much more than just Wharton Esherick. Nonie's been with the museum since 2004. Before that, was in curatorial positions at the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Chipstone Foundation. Over the course of her career, she's overseen major projects and exhibitions, including the installation of the MFA Boston's Art of the Americas wing, which opened in 2010 and featured more than 5,000 works from the museum's American collection, as well as exhibitions on topics as varied as the Saturday Evening Girls and Paul Revere pottery, arts and crafts jewelry, and I hope this is still on view in a post-COVID world, Women Take the Floor, an exhibition that challenges the dominant history of 20th century American art by focusing on overlooked and underrepresented work of women artists. So lots of really exciting and varied experience. Esherick is, of course, one small part of her purview. We're excited to have her here today to talk about how his works and legacy fit into these bigger stories that Nonie tells within the context of an American collection spanning all of history. So to give you a sense of the conversation and how it's going to work today, I'll be asking Nonie questions, we'll be having a conversation, we'll be showing some images. We'll leave about 10 minutes towards the end for questions that the Esherick Museum staff can answer in the chat. They'll go ahead and answer, and questions that are specifically for Nonie we'll come back to at the end. So without further ado, let's say hello to Nonie. Hi. Oh.
Unmuting, that always helps, right?
It does indeed.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks, Emily, for inviting me.
Well, so Nonie, I've given a little bit of context for your background, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what you do at the museum, what's in your charge, and a sort of detail or two that's not in the bio.
Sure. Well, as Emily said, I work with my responsibilities are both decorative arts and sculpture. So decorative arts, that means furniture, silver, ceramics, anything 3D. And at the MFA, it's a little different. We throw sculpture in there as well. So we keep all the 3D material together. We do have separate curatorial departments for textiles and musical instruments. So I'm not responsible for those areas, but I do work very closely with my colleagues in those areas as well. And until 2010, we were responsible for the art of the Americas all the way up to the present, all the decorative arts. And then in 2010, Emily, I inaugurated our first Warnick Curator of Contemporary Decorative Arts. And so Emily and I, of course, worked very closely together through that transition as we worked to figure out all of the various ways that we can cover and pay attention to this important part of the collection, being studio craft and contemporary design. And studio craft is a particularly strong collection at the Museum of Fine Arts. If you're outside of the museum or know of the museum, you might know of our colonial collection. First and foremost, we do feature that very strongly when you first come into the museum at the Art of the Americas wing. But we have been pushing our interpretation of that to be very different, to show the connections over the hemisphere, North, Central, and South America, as well as to show other aspects and other lesser known stories in our galleries. But one of our strengths and very strong collections is the studio furniture collection in particular, and studio craft in general. And that is all due to one of my predecessors, Jonathan Fairbanks. And Jonathan was a real pioneer in the field as a curator in collecting studio craft and studio furniture in particular. He started and really got rolling with a National Endowment for the Arts grant. Arts or humanities? NEA or NEH, one of them, grant for starting a program that he called Please Be Seated. And this is a program in which furniture makers made benches for the museum galleries that people could sit in. This program has been copied and mimicked at museums all across the nation, if not the world at this point. And we had just a phenomenal array of works come in from that program through this NEH grant, including 12 works by Wendell Castle and 13 by Sam Maloof and Tay Frid and all of these major studio craft figures. So this has been a really fun thing to work with in our collection and try to figure that out. But one of the things we were missing, of course, we did not have any Esherick in the collection. And how can you have a strong collection of studio craft furniture without showing Esherick and showing who, as you all know, many consider the father of studio furniture. So that was something that we were definitely looking to, and for a long time had been looking to fill as a gap, as a hole in our collection.
Well, so let's take a little step back before you were looking to fill
that
gap.
So excited.
No apologies needed. I'm curious about how you first sort of encountered Esherick. What was your introduction to his work, and what first made a mark?
Well, you asked for a little part of my bio that hadn't been noted, and one important part of my bio is that I am a Philadelphia girl, born and raised, and that my mother has been involved at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, both as a guide and as a member of the Women's Committee for my entire life. Lynn Gadsden, a shout out to all of her friends that you guys see there. And she, so as a child, I was raised with the Philadelphia Craft Show. And I was the coat check girl. I was poured the sodas for years. As I got older, I graduated to helping artists in their booths when they needed a break. So I was around the Philadelphia Craft Show for a good part of my life. Didn't think that it would sink in, or what effect that would have. And then when the Women's Committee helped support the installation of the Bach house room, the fireplace in here you see here in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which the museum acquired in 1989 and then installed in 1991, that was really my first time with direct contact with Esherick, and just remember having sort of my mind blown, like, what is this craziness? And I wanted to learn more.
So let's talk a little bit about what's in your purview, what's in your collection now.
Of Esherick, yes. We have two wonderful examples of Esherick that have both come into the museum when I've been there. One was spearheaded by some former colleagues, or still colleagues, but not in the department anymore. And one I was able to help spearhead with your help, Emily. And so do you have the first slide? Great. This is the Wharton Esherick screen that we were able to acquire in 2006. Both of the pieces that we have in our collection were purchases, which is a significant outlay for the museum and a significant commitment to the museum to include Esherick in our collection. And this just fabulous screen is actually, it looks large in that photo. It's actually sort of pretty diminutive. It's only about 5 feet tall. But my colleagues, Kelly Hayes and Jerry Ward, were the ones who really pushed for this right after creating the Maker's Hand exhibition at the MFA in 2003. And we loved the connection with Esherick's printmaking and the connection with art and with a lot of the regionalist paintings that we had in our collection, and the chip carving, even with the works that come from the 17th century in our collection. We could make so many ties with this piece to an encyclopedic collection, because when we're looking to bring a work of art into a collection, we want to make sure that it can tell multiple stories, that we can use it in many different contexts. And we'll get into that a little bit later with some of the slides that we have to show. But those are some of the stories that we were going on here. And I also love the next slide, I think has his signature, which I think is fantastic. You see it's 1927. It's quite an early piece for Esherick. So we also like to be able to show for particularly important artists, evolution over time in their creation. And this was a great way of showing some of Esherick's early work as he was going from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional and moving into the more sculptural from there.
And so we're lucky enough, I'll give a little plug for Weems' collection for the Esherick Museum's. Oh, sorry, you want to talk about this first?
This is a great example of the printmaking, the prints that he created. You could just see the connection between his chip carving on the screen and the prints that he's making at the same time. This was first printed in 1927, and this is literally around the corner from the studio. As you explained to me that this was Jug Hollow is, you know, a road away, and I love just thinking about Esherick looking outside his window in the studio or walking down the road and seeing this and then copying that onto this landscape of the screen that he was creating at the time.
And I'll share, you know, so we're lucky enough at the Esherick Museum to have another piece from that very early period, Esherick's drop leaf desk, also from 1927. Nonie and I were talking back and forth before the conversation started about whether we could date specifically the exact order that these pieces came in, but it similarly has that that kind of literature almost, the wonderful depictions of nature, the sort of the turkey vultures and the branches here. And then of course, when you come see it at the Esherick Museum, you can see part of it here on the far left side of the screen. You see it in a very, very different context than you would at someplace like the MFA.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about our screen is that we don't know if it was made for somebody in particular, or if it was a commission, or whether he, you know, what was the early history of this piece. And we don't know that. So if anybody out there does, please be in contact with me. We've been able to track it down somewhat to, you know, more recent years, but including the fact that at one point it hung on the wall like a painting. But we have not been able to figure out why Esherick made it and for whom. And that would be a wonderful thing to know, because I think that would tell us a lot about the piece itself.
And so Nonie, you have this piece in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about what else needs to come in to sort of more fully tell not only Esherick's story, but also the bigger story of furniture, of and so let's talk about the other piece that you guys acquired.
And as I mentioned, we for very important artists, we like to be able to show their evolution, and to show, particularly with Esherick being such a major influence on the studio furniture movement and on the Wendell Castles and the Sam Maloofs and all who came after him and looked to him and cite him as a major influence. Seeing how his work, Esherick's work, changed over time, it was really important to see this change. He was a real change maker, to use a common day phrase. And so I wanted to find something that was more sculptural. I wanted to find something that had a very different feel. And then luckily, Emily, you found something and forwarded the email to me, and it'll come up here in just 1 second. There we go. This just superb Victrola cabinet, which I just adore, made of Paduke wood. It had a very, very reddish color to it when it was first, sort of reddish purpley color when it was first completed. And this complete feels so different with the very sleek lines, very cubist inspired and very, but also connecting with the modern design world. This is just 3 years later in 1930, but you can see an evolution in Esherick's work, and as the world around him is changing so fast, with modern design really coming on full bore in the late 27, 28, 29. And his response to it here with this very Cubist inspired piece. I also loved that it was made to hold a sculpture. So it's a piece of sculpture that is a subtle piece, but it was made to hold a sculpture. And it was also originally made to house a radio cabinet, so a record player. And so that very modern use was an important thing to me, because we also, in addition to our studio furniture collection, have a very strong collection of modern design from the 1920s and 30s. And this, being able to connect this work with that collection was important to me as well.
And I'll just share, we skipped over them, but just to give a little bit of context, related works from the Esherick Museum's collection, again, here in the studio context, I think you can see that same sort of prismatic construction, that wonderful geometry in his flat top desk, made only a year before the Victrola Cabinet, although here with a top made in 1962. The original top, however, is shown in this image, and I think that point that you're making about modern design is so impactful, because the top here is actually aluminum. So using a material that was certainly very much in vogue amongst designers at the time. And this is a shot of the desk in Esherick's farmhouse.
I didn't realize that was aluminum. That's really neat.
Yeah.
Very in vogue, very, very much one of the it materials of the time. So that's really cool. And the proportions of it feel so much more like our Victrola cabinet than the later piece, which has the long overhanging edges. This, you feel much more that compactness of the Cubist style. It's almost like he was trying to frame in Cubism, which good luck. But it's an interesting mode that he was going there. So this art piece, if you give the next slide, this is the inside, which has been revamped several times over its life. I should mention that we were able to acquire this piece thanks to Bob Abel at the Moderne Gallery in Philadelphia. And I think Bob's here. So hi, Bob. Thank you. And the interior, you can see on your right, the record cabinet, the drawers, the very tall, thin drawers that you can pull out that have, I'll show you a detail of that in a second. And then on the left are some doors that would have had part of the radio innards in there. And then down below probably would have had some sort of fabric screen in front of it, again, hiding more radio parts on the inside. There is a label on side for K-part radio. I've done some extensive research on what model K-part would have been in there and what it would have looked like and how the interior may have been revamped. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those notes with me here in quarantine, but we hope to be able to bring back some aspect of what it might have looked like when it was originally created. And this piece was originally created. We do know the history of this piece for Esherick's first major patron, Helen Fisher, and for an interior, and it was created to hold a piece of sculpture on top of it in her home. But it had this dual purpose. It held sculpture, but it also played as a record cabinet as well. Does the next slide have the details of the yes, and you can see those fabulous sort of pigeonhole drawers, or what, that's the wrong word, but sliding, they're drawers that pull out. You can see the little cuts where you can put your fingers to pull them out, and each has its own little symbol on it. I don't know if those meant anything to anybody, what those symbols are, with what you would put in them. But that's probably my favorite part of this whole cabinet. And unfortunately, really hard to show the public, especially when the rest of the interior is not so yummy looking. But and then, of course, the signature on the inside, Wharton Esherick 1930, plus J.S., plus John Schmidt, the furniture maker who was his neighbor and who had collaborated on some of his earlier works.
So Noni, can you tell us a little bit more about, say, the contexts that you've shown these
Yeah,
pieces in?
great. If you show the next slide, let's see what we have there.
Okay.
This is the context in which Helen Fisher showed this piece when she acquired it in 1930. And this is, you can see it had a long, low sculpture lying across it. With, you know, when I first saw this picture, I was really surprised. I was expecting it to be a much more modernist interior, but I love how it brings a soft modernist touch. So modernism in wood, a soft modernist touch into a more eclectic interior. How about the next picture? And here's a way we showed the screen when we opened the Art of the Americas wing in 2010. And we showed the screen as part of a gallery that looked at landscape and the duality between rural and city. So this slide shows you several of the city paintings, the hopper, the Krite, for example. But then you also see the Pippin in the background as well, and showing you this sort of look at the landscape. And this, it really had a pride of place. It was the first thing you saw when you came into the gallery. And we raised it up to really get people looking at it in a different way. I think furniture you can raise up on a pedestal and you look at it very differently than if it had been down on the ground at a different angle. And I think both are valid, and it gives you different ways of looking at furniture and gives you different perspectives on them. The next slide is the only image I have of the installation of the Victrola cabinet when we had it installed. It was installed in our Art of the 1920s and 30s gallery, which is primarily a modern design gallery. But I was very eager to bring this in to show how Esherick sort of worked within the concepts of modern design at the time, while bringing in the wood and the emphasis on the materials. And you see it here with wanted a sculpture on top. It's not a long, low sculpture like Helen Fisher had, but this is a James Richmond Barthé sculpture of Farrell Benga, and then the Cubist painting above it as well. But I just think being able to show this within a very different context than it would be shown, say, at the studio or in the Fisher home. And I love that this guy on Instagram thought it was wonderful. So I thought I'd give my own plug for that too. So how about the next slide?
Sure.
So why don't we just go on to the next slide and we can come back to this for just
Perfect.
a second. One of the things that Emily asked me to talk about is, you know, how do we think about Esherick in an encyclopedic museum? And there's many different ways that we look at him, and look at him just within his time period. These three screens were all made within 3 years of each other. Donald Deskey, Wharton Esherick, and Max Cune. All different techniques, all very experimental and modernist in their own ways. But that's a wonderful thing that an encyclopedic art museum like the MFA can do in bringing new perspectives and new ways of looking at these artists. The previous screen was the MFA's most recent acquisition. I'm proud to say that last week we officially acquired the Greta Grossman screen made in 1952. This screen is on view in the Women Take the Floor exhibition that will be on view at the MFA through May 2021. So you all will have a chance to see this exhibition. But this wonderful modernist screen, and just thinking through all of the fabulous screens we have in our collection, and why the screen became such a sort of way for designers and for craftspeople to express themselves. And you know, as I joke, this screen has absolutely no practical purpose. It doesn't screen anything, but it's a very expressive piece in itself. And same with the Esherick screen. You're not going to hide behind it because it's pretty diminutive. So I'd love to think further about the purposes of these screens and how they were used in a home, and try to get a better sense of that as well.
And maybe there's even some kind of interesting conversation about absence and presence, the absence of material and the presence of material that links
Absolutely.
a screen like this and this kind of carving on Esherick's work.
For sure.
Yeah.
The next slide will show just, you know, we have the ability to show Esherick within a chronological context. So we can put works within time and space. So here you have from the chip carved piece by Thomas Dennis in the upper left-hand corner from the 1680s, made here in Massachusetts, all the way through to the Art Carpenter piece in the lower right-hand corner. But through time, this form of a chest of drawers or a small chest to enclose and to encompass something, what that looked like through time in different locations. And I love being able to put the Victrola cabinet within such a sort of lineup of styles to make you think about the purpose of enclosing, the purpose of holding, the purpose of what these objects were meant to do, both functionally and also how they were most to function within a room. Often these were the real show-off pieces within a room. They were supposed to grab your attention and be the Cadillac in the room, or should I say? But it's to be able to put this in. I love looking at the Esherick with the Cuban chest that's in the second row all the way on the left, and that piece is absolutely massive. And just thinking about all the curves in the Cuban chest versus all the straight lines in the Esherick, and the 200 years between those pieces, I think it's a wonderful way of looking, but both so focused on the wood and expressing the woods that they're made of.
So I have to ask, seeing the Art Carpenter here and getting a little bit more into the studio furniture era, and of course there's an interesting relationship between something like Art Carpenter's wishbone chair and the SK chairs that Esherick designed also for Helen Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
What are you missing? What do you wish you had of Esherick? I mean, what do you wish you had of everything is a big question, but
yes. Lots. How about that staircase? No, I would love a chair. I would love I think he had as you say, his chairs were quite influential on later generations. That would be something that I would love. You know, can you get me a music stand? That would be pretty awesome too. I mean, there's some iconic pieces, and the music stand, just like the screen, for some reason the music stand caught on with studio furniture makers in the 20th century, that whether there was a big market for music stands or whether it just became a way of showing off your skill in a very sculptural way, I'm not sure. But there's these fabulous music stands that go through different generations. It's almost like it's a piece that you show your stuff with. You show your skill. So the music stand to me is quite iconic.
And so you've talked a little bit about it, this sort of broader context, but I'm curious if you can sort of sum it up. What do you see as Esherick's legacy within the field of studio furniture, within the field of modern design? What's the sort of important contribution? What's the takeaway in your eyes with this big perspective behind you?
Yeah, well, I think we made it very clear, my colleagues and I, early on, when we put out Wharton Esherick as one of our major crafts people that we wanted to bring into the collection, that we put our limited funds behind it, was that he was such a change maker, so influential to later generations, and so many of the craftspeople that were already represented in our collection. And I think, and the creation of the whole studio craft movement, he was one of those independent thinkers who was doing his own thing that had maybe a soft voice, but a very loud impact, and bringing on the legacy that we see throughout the collection of craftsmanship and continuing that through the 20th century. And he's in essence that link between the two. If you go to the next slide, You'll see the very different pieces from modern design, but I think these all work very well together. This is a Paul Frankel desk and bookcase and a Victor Schreckengast skyscraper. You can see the skyscraper motif on the jazz bowl. But Frankel is another icon of this period. This is also 1927. That's the fun thing. These are both 1920. Oh no, this is 1930. That's one's 1927. Sorry, the Frankel is 1927. But he's looking at modern architecture, at the skyscraper. And while this is a beautiful piece of design, it's really not so nicely made. And so you really get to see this push and pull of the world of craft and the world of design, and how these things are created, the ethos behind them, etc. So I love being able to show both sides of that. And I think Esherick is one of the pivotal voices for craft in the early 20th century. Craft in the machine age.
Well, I know that COVID might have interrupted your plans, but I'm curious if there are future plans to show these pieces or other contexts that you're thinking about.
Absolutely. And yes, COVID has thrown a big wrench in a lot of works, but I have dreams, and as do many of my colleagues. I would love to explore Esherick's influence on some of his later colleagues, and try to bring him into the connection of both studio furniture as well as the modern design movement. And we have some ideas behind that. Nothing has been approved or moving forward yet, but we came together in a meeting with my colleagues and to start rethinking what our next big plans for the top floor of the Art of the Americas wing is. Right now it has Women Take the Floor in it, for when that comes down. And we were asked to bring the pieces that we really wanted, that must be on view, that are not on view now, and we feel they really strongly, they need to get back out on view. And that screen was the first thing I brought. To me, that is such a strong piece, such an important piece in our collection, that we need to get that back out on view. So come hell or high water, I'm getting that out on view.
Well, you're fighting the good fight, and we're very thankful for it. What's next for you beyond Esherick, seeing as this is just a very small part of your purview? Share something that's exciting to you now that you're working on.
Sure. Well, one of the fun things I'm working on right now is a book on our modern design collection, based off of our modern design collection, that is focusing on 5 cultural impulses, 5 cultural trends of the 1920s and 30s, and looking at it through the lens of one designer and one of their works of art, to get into a deep dive into that cultural concept. For example, the skyscraper desk and bookcase that you see here is going to be a look into how skyscraper architecture influenced design and how design influenced skyscraper architecture. That's a kind of an obvious one. Another topic is going to be prohibition and the influence of the laws of prohibition, and the jazz bowl is going to be my feature object for that. But right now I'm working on a really fun chapter on plastic, and the impact of plastic on this period. So here I'm looking at Wharton Esherick with you from 1927 and 1930, but plastic is really starting to boom in 1928 when Bakelite's patents expire. So looking at a very different aspect of this world, and particularly excited to feature a female designer, the first major female industrial designer to make a name for herself in the United States, Belle Kogan. So really bringing out her story.
Fabulous.
I could go on and on.
No, it's wonderful. Well, I think right now we should maybe take a break and see if there are any questions or comments from everyone who's here. Thank you so much, Nonie, for sharing all of these wonderful thoughts about Esherick and context and the way that you're using these pieces. Oh, I see a question from Diana. So she says, I'd love to inquire about the relationship between direct carvers and printmakers. I've been thinking about this in the context of Elizabeth Catlett, but I'm wondering if you both see resonances between Esherick's approach to carving wood and how he approached incising into a block or plate. Absolutely,
Yeah.
certainly. I'll just say at the Esherick Museum, part of our collection are the wood blocks that were made to create all of the prints. And so you can really see that relationship in a very clear way. And Esherick also repurposed those blocks, filling them in with paint, and thought of them as art objects in their own right in certain cases. So that's definitely a connection there.
And of course, Catlett, being both a sculptor and a printmaker as well, has a lot of that connection. And you can see that in her approach to the woodblock. There's just a much more depth and richness to her working with the woodblock than you may see with some other folks who aren't as comfortable with the wood itself, and may not be carving themselves either. I definitely would agree with that. We have a great Elizabeth Catlett up in Women Take the Floor, if you're interested in that.
Nonie, how long is that exhibit up?
Women Take the Floor is up through May 3rd, 2020. And it features women artists of the last century from the MFA collection. We are not trying to focus on all women. We cannot, that's impossible, but from the MFA collection, focusing on the stories that we can tell well from our collection.
Great, I hope to see it.
I hope you do too. I can put a plug in, this is great. We just launched an online tour of it. So if you go to the MFA website and you go to the exhibition page for Women Take the Floor, you can see the beta version. We're still working on it, but you can start seeing a virtual tour of some of the rooms of that exhibition.
Great, thank you.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in, or put them in the chat box.
Thank you for a great lecture. That was great. Great conversation.
Thank you so much for joining.
Is it possible for us to share our slides with the group here tonight? I think that should be possible, Nonie.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure. All of our, well, the only one I don't know about is the interior shot from Helen Fisher's home. I'm not sure where I got that. Mm-hmm. I have to look back at my records to make sure that it's okay to share that with others. But other than that, yes, absolutely.
You reach out to us and we can stay in touch with you and figure that out.
Emily, would you like to mention do we have a date for our next one?
We do not, but since this is the first in the series, please let us know how you found the conversation. We'd love to hear more from you. It's a wonderful. I'm sorry.
No, I said only the good stuff.
Only the good stuff. No, warts and all. But we're really excited about the chance to use these virtual events to take our audiences for the Esherick House, for the studio, into this broader world of Esherick as the work is seen around the country in different collections. So we're thrilled that Nonie was able to be here. Thank you again. Feel free to be in touch with me or Nonie. I think we have contact information. If there are questions that come up after the event is over. Oh, when did you acquire the cabinet?
2015.
2015.
2015 from Bob Abel at Modern. And I should put a plug in that if anybody knows more information about these pieces, the histories or so forth, please, I'm always interested in learning more. As Emily said, I cover a lot of different material from a lot of different time periods. So I can't dive in as much as I always would like to on individual objects. So if you're willing and interested in sharing more, please, I would love to hear it.
Nonie, should we put your email in the chat?
Sure, I can do that right now.
Emily's as well?
Yep, we can certainly do that. Feel free to be in touch with either one of us, and I'll do mine as well. And we hope We hope to see you. We'll share the next event in this series through our newsletter and our website. I'd encourage you to spend some time on the resources on the Esherick Museum's website. We have some great, in addition to the links to Esherick and collections around the country, we have a full bibliography. We have collections highlights. We have lots more material on Esherick to explore there. So I highly encourage you to take a look.
I can't wait to get back myself.
Well, thank you, everyone. Julie, do you want to say anything before we head off?
Just a thank you to you both, and again to everyone for tuning in virtually. It's really been incredible to pull these events together and welcome people from far afield, from those who can get to Malvern with advanced reservations in groups of 10. So there's been an upside to this, and I'm really excited to see more of it. So again, thank you all.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'll say goodbye. If everyone wants to unmute and say bye as they leave the room, I like that little tradition that seems to be a part of these Zoom events now.
I think I can do that part.
Hi, Mark.
Hello.
You're all unmuted.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Hi, Mark and Terry.
Hi, nice to see you.
Bye.